Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to talk this afternoon, if I may, about the fact that there are several strands in the great debate that we're having about the difference of opinion between people who have a religious outlook and those who don't. To some extent, the distinctions I want to draw were prefigured by my predecessor at the podium here, Mr. Pataki. You will notice if you, after tea time, are alert and stay awake long enough, that there will be one or two slightly different approaches to some of the issues that were raised then. But one thing that I very much agree with Mr. Pataki about is that questions of metaphysics, which is about the nature of the universe and what it contains, are importantly different from questions about religion, which of course is man-made and a sociological phenomenon that has persisted throughout recorded history at very least. But there will be one or two differences between us, as you'll see, on certain other matters. The distinction I want to draw is between those metaphysical questions about the nature of the universe and questions about the place of religion in the public square, which is essentially the secularism issue, and about which we've heard a good deal this weekend already. And those two are again separable from, although there are very natural connections with, questions about what is now called humanism, or secular humanism, understood in our contemporary setting as a family of views about ethics, about how we live our lives and how we construct societies that are amenable to the living of good individual lives. And it's important to say something about all three of these things, although it's possible and significant to take the secularism issue and the humanism issue together. It was a very long time ago, Aristotle pointed out that questions of ethics as they apply to individuals and questions of society which concern the right construction of a society that conduces to good individual lives are of course seamlessly connected. Ethics and politics run together, and when Aristotle wrote his great set of lectures on ethics, he said that the next automatic question that follows is the question about how you construct a society, and that was his lectures on the politics. But first let me say a little bit about the metaphysical issue. It's a significant one, not just because it bears on this question that we are largely agreed about here, which is that this universe of ours doesn't contain supernatural agencies in it, but because there is another debate, or a parallel one to the metaphysical one, premised on the use of a certain expression, which I want to argue is a very deeply misleading expression or phrase. And the phrase in question is religion and science, as though somehow or other this denoted a connection or a difference or an opposition or a complementarity, where significant questions really do arise about the relation of religion in general and science. I mean, it has been pointed out that there is one science and there are many religions, but noticing that fact doesn't stop the debate about the connection or relationship or lack of either between religion and science being debated and raised in ways that are actually inimical to science and to science education. And therefore, this is a very important point. It's an important point because there are a number of different views that people don't very often put into connection with each other about whether science and religion are complementary but non-overlapping. This is the Stephen Jay Gould view about non-overlapping magisteria. That the natural and social sciences address themselves to a phenomena that can be empirically investigated, whereas religion addresses itself to matters of the spirit, to the transcendent realm, to the divine. And this was something which seemed tremendously important to people in the early part of our modern era, in the 16th and 17th centuries. For example, Descartes was particularly anxious to try to persuade the church of which he was a loyal, lifelong member, the Catholic Church, that they could allow science to go on uninterrupted, that they needn't feel anxious about it, because science was addressing itself to phenomena that wasn't really the concern of the religious authorities, that their concern was much more a moral and a spiritual one. And this was a matter that pressed for people at Descartes' time because Descartes himself Galileo, Giordano Bruno, various other people were under pressure from the church not to say things about the nature of material reality that conflicted with Scripture. Famously, the pressure point was the adoption or agreement with the Copernican view, the Copernican heliocentric view of the universe, or not. In the year 1600, Giordano Bruno was burnt to death in the Campo dei Fiori in Rome because, among other things, he accepted the Copernican view. Cardinal Bellarmine famously wrote to a cleric who had sent him a letter arguing that Scripture was consistent with Copernicus, saying to this errant cleric that all he had to do was to read Psalm 102, which says that the Lord hath laid the foundations of the earth, that it may not be moved forever, and also citing all the fathers and all the theologians who said that the earth doesn't move and stays at the center of the universe, and that in his prudence, said Cardinal Bellarmine, he should accept this view of the heavens. Then, of course, Galileo himself had to acknowledge that the earth had never moved for him, which was a rather sad reflection. And even though, of course, on his way out of the Inquisition chamber, he did mutter to somebody, "Epo si muove," but it does move for all that. And he spent the rest of his life under house arrest because of it. At that time, the church itself took the view that religion was a direct competitor with science for the truth. It was a direct competitor with science for an understanding of the physical universe and how it worked. Of course, since then, it's given up that view, and just very recently, less than 20 years ago, Rome announced that it had been wrong about Galileo, so it's okay to accept the Copernican view. So now we think that the church may itself have at long last agreed with Descartes and with Stephen Jay Gould, that these are non-overlapping magisteria, that science and religion have quite different spheres of interest, and that in that sense they complement one another, because where science has a great deal to say, there is nothing of moment for the spiritual and moral in our lives, and where religion has a great deal to say, there is an acceptance that the deity might have created a universe which runs according to natural law, runs according, as Descartes wanted to put it, according to mechanical principles like a clock which had been wound up and let going, and that the two therefore could be investigated and discussed separately. But the truth is, of course, that the great religions all have views about the origin and nature of the universe and its destiny, which at a number of points do impinge on the scientific worldview, and where therefore there is a direct competition over the truth, which of the two general outlooks has the right way of thinking about things. And it's important to come back to that, because it suggests something uncomfortable for people who do have a religious outlook, namely that if ever they're able to state something about their religious view which is not obscure or equivocal or ambiguous or wrapped in mystery, if they could ever say anything clear and direct about what they think about the world, that it could, in principle, be testable by science. But as you know, there is an escape clause in almost all religions, which is that God will not be tested. So you can't conduct scientific investigations to test religious claims. I remember once being asked by somebody who went like this, to start and said, "What's this?" And the answer was, "It's God moving in a mysterious way." And this is what the theologians will say if you ask them if there is something that could be directly challenged or tested by a scientific investigation. However, there is another difficulty which is illustrated by the work of the Templeton Foundation. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this extremely rich foundation, which gives a prize every year, the Templeton Prize, worth more than the Nobel Prize, to anybody, and this includes, and especially, they especially like scientists and philosophers who will do this, who will make noises friendly to religion. And they fund quite a lot of scientific research. They also give a great deal of money to theology and to apologetical work and to religious publications. And I thought I might just bring along with me some examples of the things that they fund, so that you would see that the question of the relation between science and religion still somewhat presses in our contemporary world, and one reason why, therefore, this metaphysical debate needs to be continued. And it goes like this, and there's just some examples of a program they have, which is called Science in Dialogue, meaning in dialogue with religion. Science in Dialogue. And it says here, the Foundation, Templeton Foundation, has a strong interest in projects that bring one or more scientific disciplines into a mutually enriching discussion with theology and or philosophy, whether for a scholarly audience or the public at large. So one this is a list of their featured grants, the ones that they're rather pleased with. The Evolution and Theology of Cooperation, the Emergence of Altruistic Behavior, Forgiveness, and Unselfish Love. And another one is Research Fellowship in Religion, Spirituality, and Health. Another one is Science and Religion in Islam. Another one is Darwin and Religion. And the sorts of people who are given these grants are, in the case of the Evolution and Theology of Cooperation, a person who is the head of the Evolutionary Dynamics program at Harvard Divinity School, and in the case of Spirituality, Theology, and Health, a group of people who work in the Sociology Department at Duke University and at the Interdisciplinary University of Paris. So these are serious institutions which are getting this money, and you notice when you look at the titles of the grants that there is an embranglement, to use a wonderful term coined by Bishop Berkeley, between science and religion, trying to implicate or insert into one sphere of activity, the scientific, the religious, and vice versa. And the main reason for this, of course, is to retain a sense of respectability for religion by association with science. Scientific endeavor, the giving of grants to what look like major research projects, but they are joint interdisciplinary research projects, and so this maintains an aura of respectability for religion. And so the question does arise, what are people wanting to mean when they use this phrase, religion and science, as though either there is a complementarity or there is a connection between them, or something can be learned from one for the other. And the argument I want to put is that one can learn something about religion and religious sensibility, which is of course a very complex thing because there are many religions and there are many religious phenomena, including mystical phenomena and the like, that can be studied scientifically. A neurologist friend of mine once told me that he had a patient come to see him who was a retired Don at university, in fact at Edinburgh University, and this patient said to him, "I think I've had a stroke, and moreover I think I've had a stroke in the occipital lobe of my brain on the right-hand side." And my neurologist friend was very used to people self-diagnosing from the internet and coming up with all sorts of very peculiar complaints. And he said, "Well, why do you think that?" And this retired academic said, "Because there are figures rising up out of the floor and floating up into the sky in my left visual field." It turned out when he had a scan that he had had a minor stroke in the visual part of the visual center of the brain. And when the little blood clot had resolved after a couple of weeks, the angels that kept floating up out of the floor vanished. But the academic knew that they weren't angels. He knew that they were symptomatic of some cerebral accident, some minor brain damage. But if he had not been an academic, and if he had lived in another time in history or another place in the world today, he would have been having religious visions. And if one thinks about the accident in the past or in contemporary life of people getting overtired or having an epileptic fit or a fever or getting drunk or eating a magic mushroom, or all the different reasons why people might have encounters with the gods and then interpreted them as real eruptions into a different realm, and that they were somehow getting messages from elsewhere, maybe George W. Bush had these sorts of encounters on a regular basis, you could see how they would reinforce the sense that there is a reality that is being encountered. Now, science can address this. Science can look at these sorts of phenomena and very often find really rather good reasons why they occur. Psychology, empirical psychology, can also look at the very well recognized and attested phenomena of conviction and of joy, of exaltation, of exhilaration that comes in very large megachurch meetings when they are, as was described last night in a very amusing way, brought to it by a skilled orator, somebody who has marvelous command of rhetoric and can lead a group of people, a demagogue. I mean, we've seen it in the film footage with Hitler doing it with tens of thousands of people, and it can happen in mega churches as well. Induced sense of the reality of the alleged truths. And this, again, is something that can be studied by empirical science. But it is not at all clear what can be offered from religion to science. Should one, one's got a puzzle about elementary particles, how do they get mass? If we don't get energy levels sufficiently high at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, can we find out anything about the Higgs boson by looking at the Rig Veda or at the Quran? And it's not clear that we're going to have much success in that direction. So whereas we can expect to learn a great deal about the phenomena of religious experience and religious sensibility by the work of the empirical sciences, natural and social sciences, it's not clear that we're going to get anything in the opposite direction. And that leads us to ask some questions, really, about this alleged relationship, which seems to be connoted by the phrase religion and science. Because little reflection shows that science as a sort of corporate entity, itself very various, ranging from fundamental physics all the way to geology and meteorology and, lots of ologies, and religion, which is also an extremely various set of phenomena as well, that the relationship between them is by no means as simple or straightforward as the phrase seems to suggest. But we know one thing, that what is characteristic of scientific inquiry, the scientific mindset, if you like, which asks questions of nature and of human beings and of society in ways that can be tested, looks for the kind of evidence that could support conclusions drawn about nature and society and human beings, which is always open to refutation. It is intrinsically defeasible. It can be met by counter-evidence, and if you meet with strong counter-evidence, you either reformulate your hypothesis or you abandon it and look for an alternative. There's something about the scientific mindset which is always questing, always open to refutation, which is not made anxious by the fact that we don't have all the answers, but indeed is enthused by that fact to go and look for answers or to try to formulate questions that admit of answers. Whereas what is characteristic of the religious mindset flows from the fact that we human beings are very eager for stories. We want an account, an explanation of things that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and which is explanatory and which is reassuring. And it's a very notable fact that whereas most religions can be explained, and the message of salvation, for example, associated with Christianity, can be explained very briefly, probably doesn't take as much as half an hour, it takes some years to get to grips with the basics of physics or the biological sciences. This is one reason why, of course, the religions are very attractive. It doesn't take so much thought, and also they convey those certainties that we're all very anxious to have. So there is no consistency between what is characteristic of the scientific mindset and what's characteristic of the religious mindset. Remember that in the major religions of Christianity and Islam, unquestioning faith and obedience to the tenets of the faith and to the ministers of the faith is regarded as a major virtue. And St. Paul said, the three virtues, hope, love, and faith, that faith was a very important one. When doubting Thomas wanted to have proof, he wanted to stick his finger into the wound, he was sort of told off because all the others had believed but they hadn't seen. And Søren Kierkegaard, makes it a great virtue that faith is sometimes something one commits oneself to in the very face of evidence, that one takes a leap into all the counter-arguments and embraces and accepts a certain kind of view. And this is very, very different indeed from science. Someone once very aptly said, where faith begins, science ends. So there's no consistency there, and therefore the phrase religion and science is one which has a very misleading connotation. One thing that one can say about them, and you have to remember that the apologists of religion are very keen to say, well, look, the natural and social sciences emerged from religion, just as they're very keen to say that our understanding of the rule of law and human rights emerged from religion. Great claims are made about Christianity, for example, as having had this influence in our Western tradition of being the originator of ideas of the equality of human beings and rights. One need only say that Christianity remained consistent for 1,800 years with slavery, the attitude that it took to women, the fact that it supported tremendous social hierarchies, in fact even had as part of its metaphysic the idea of the great chain of being from the worm to the deity, in which man was at the center, but man was higher than the other animals and higher than woman, of course, and that there was the hierarchy of angels and archangels, principalities and powers. So the idea of hierarchy, the idea of the divine right of kings, none of this seems to be very promising from the point of view of a human rights agenda about the equality of human beings. So how they can claim that is very difficult to say. But they also claim, that out of inquiry, debate, discussion in the church, in theology, came the kind of discussion and inquiry which gave rise to science. And so that makes one take a couple of steps back and ask whether it is really true that science emerged from religion. Well, now, there is a story to be told, and it's one referred to by Mr. Pataki, about the origins of religion in animism. It's one of our best understandings of the kind of outlook of our ancestors for many, many tens of thousands of years, many tens of thousands of years before the young religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam emerged just in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, at a time, by the way, when monarchical and hierarchical social structures gave us our model of a sort of kingly deity who issues commands. Now, it happens to be quite a separate matter that religion in our last 2,000 years, or perhaps slightly less, has in part addressed itself to the emotional needs of people. But it's a very unhistorical view to think that religion has always been about human emotions. In fact, it's rather distinctive of versions of Christianity that it preaches an individual relationship between a human being and the deity, such that you can have whispered conversations in bed at night and so on. Most religions in the past were not personal religions. Think about Roman religion. That was a public religion or set of religions. The empire embraced many different views, but what it wanted was a public observance of the rites, of the celebrations, the feasts, for reasons of social cohesion. They didn't think that Jupiter and Juno and Mars and the other Roman gods were available for private confession or were interested in private prayer. What people had was the Lares and Penates, the gods of the spirits of the hearth, which were their own, sort of touch wood kind of tutelary deities that they could appeal to if things were going wrong or they were ill or needed a bit of luck. But that's a quite different thing from what is preached by in Christian moral psychology, which is about this possible personal relationship. It's, by the way, if you decide that you want a religion for purposes of relationship, then I should go for Catholicism, because there are loads of beings that you can relate to. It's not just Jesus and God, Mary, all the saints, and Saint Mary, the Australian one, and so on. So what one can say is that the origin of science and the origin of religion share a common ancestor. It's not that science emerges from religion, it's that they have a common ancestor. Same sort of point you make to creationists about monkeys. They say, human beings are not descended from monkeys. And you say, that's dead right, they're not. Monkeys and human beings have a common ancestor, and they diverged a long time ago. The common ancestor of religion and science is ignorance in the early... In the early phases of our ancestors' development, and science has been, with serious interruptions and inconveniences from its fellow descendant, has been having more success latterly than the religions did. You can regard the relationship between religion and science as they evolved separately from this common ancestor, somewhat like the relationship between Cro-Magnon man, which is us, and the Neanderthals, which is them. And in fact, you can be a little bit more specific about the sort of relationship that might come out of traditional and ancient beliefs on the one hand, and the sorts of ways of thinking and kinds of theories on the basis of which we operate now. Think about, for example, the tradition of witchcraft, which is still very strong in Africa. I mean, I don't know whether you sometimes see the news that comes out of Kenya and Nigeria about terrible things that are done to children, you know, having nails knocked into their heads and so on because they're believed to be possessed by demons, or they believe to be witches. That goes on today, and it's a human rights scandal of quite a major proportion. But belief in witches and in demon possession was endemic in European society also for very many centuries. Now, the connection between witchcraft and, say, modern psychology, modern medicine, modern botany, is an oblique one. There is a connection in this sense that psychology explains to satisfaction and to our capacity for management some of the phenomena that were thought to be symptomatic of witchcraft in the past. So forms of psychosis or neurosis or just difference, or the fact that a woman was wise and knowledgeable, knew how to deal with medical complaints, branded her as a witch if somebody didn't like her. And we now have account of this now, and we can explain those phenomena in these terms. Nowadays, I hope at any rate in Australia and the UK and elsewhere, we don't think in terms of witchcraft, but we do look to our resources in empirical psychology and in botany for the herbalism and medicine side of things, and to modern medicine, to address the sort of phenomena that once were thought of or seen through the lens of witchcraft. Now, in just the same way, you could say that almost everything in the natural and social sciences, and in our study of history and in our study of philosophy, has this oblique, off-to-the-side relationship with religion, or the religions, which in the deep past were almost the only resource that people had for trying to construct some kind of story about the world, some framework of understanding, some set of concepts through which they could interpret their experience and talk about the world. So it's not that modern science, that religion is ancestral to modern science. On the contrary, if you think that our very remote ancestors had only the resource of projecting their felt sense of agency into the world as a way of explaining the wind and the tides and the sun and the thunder, and that as time went by, so a separation occurred between what they were able to make sense of on the basis of experience and inquiry, and these other stories that became more and more symbolic and less and less referential to the actual world. Then one can see something like this. One of the great turning points in the development of civilizations was agriculture, was settling down to cultivate grains and to look after plants, which involved no longer traveling around with the herds, but settling down. And out of that came urbanization. Out of urbanization came all the arts of writing and education and the rest, which have been very constitutive of the development of civilization. And so it's tremendously interesting to look at the contrast between agriculture as a kind of an applied science or an applied technology as against religious explanations and religious technologies by means of taboo and prayer and sacrifice. And if you think about our agricultural ancestors, who found out about rotation of crops and about letting the soil lie fallow and about fertilizing the soil and about irrigating it and about breeding strains of grain that were resistant to disease, eventually the discovery of pesticides. Now, all these things came out of direct empirical experience, trial and error, effort, observation, and reason, very distinctive of the intelligence of human beings in solving problems that life posed to them. Now, if you tried sprinkling holy water instead of irrigating, or if you tried prayer instead of fertilizing, or if you tried broadcasting the seed just any old where without thinking about the soils and about letting the soils breathe and so on, you would have much less success. In fact, you would have no better success than chance, or probably less, if you tried something purely on the basis of religion. I mean, to caricature the difference, it's a bit like this. Try lighting your house by prayer instead of by electricity, and you see which one works. So the strands of thinking, the one that develops ultimately into an organized, disciplined way of inquiring into natural phenomena, and which we now call science, is very different from the other, which is trying to make sense of the world in terms of traditions, of revelations, of teachings by people who take on themselves the role of prophet or teacher, and the sort of technologies they offer, the technologies of obedience and prayer and sacrifice and the rest. Now, that should, I think, give a great deal of starting material. They're just really starting points for thinking about and investigating this question of how different science and religion really are. They're quite separate from one another. They're not in the business of competing or complementing or anything else. They're very like the difference between a ham sandwich and a bicycle. You can't say that they're sort of alternatives to one another, that if you didn't have a bicycle, you could make do with a ham sandwich. On the contrary, they're just so remote from one another that at most and at best, to get some energy to ride the bicycle, you need the ham sandwich. This is the scientific investigation of some religious phenomena, but there is, as I say, nothing at all that, or very little indeed, that religion could say that would help science. Remember the Templeton example. Remember that there are wealthy organizations. Templeton is not alone. There's the Discovery Institute in Seattle. There are many well-funded organizations that continue to want to try and implicate science and religion with one another, want to introduce religious constraints or religious questions or religious dimensions to the pursuit of natural science. And they sometimes do it by saying, science doesn't solve our problems for us morally or politically or deal with those matters of the heart and mind of human beings which concern them most, questions about love and their relationships and their response to beauty. And the answer is no, they don't, because that's not what science is about. If you said to the botanist who's examining some dicotyledon somewhere, what is the meaning of life, or how should I best love my wife or something, the botanist should properly say, well, let me just put my botany to one side and respond to you as another human being. But to think that the natural sciences are somehow going to answer everything would be to be scientistic, and no responsible scientist is scientistic. No responsible scientist thinks that science is going to have all the answers. That is why we have such a rich resource in the arts, in music, in drama, in the novel, in philosophy, in history, in the conversation we have with one another at that dinner party that Mr. Hitchens is talking about, when the possibilities for these things arise. It's certainly true that most of our fellow human beings today, as throughout history, have been impoverished and oppressed in ways that make it very difficult for them even to have a chance to address these questions. A long time ago, again, Aristotle said, the possibility of good lives for people does involve an element of luck, where you were born, when you were born, in what circumstances, whether your family has wealth, whether you can have an education. And it behoves us all, I think, as being sensitive to the plight of our fellow human beings around the world, that we should strive to ensure that they do have the chance to think in these terms about what would make a good life rather than mere survival. And of course, one of the things that we would have to do is to reduce the oppressive effect of religions on them. Well, all those points I've just been making concern the sort of metaphysical question. What kind of place the universe is and what sorts of things are relevant to understanding it and to inquiring into it. We still know very, very, very little, which is great news for people in the sciences, because it means they've got plenty of work to do. It's an absolutely thrilling adventure trying to find these things out. I've had the great privilege of visiting the Large Hadron Collider in CERN on a couple of occasions and talking to the people who are conducting the experiments there. And it's so beautiful, intellectually beautiful, let alone scientifically exciting, to think that here is an endeavor to try to understand the structure and properties of matter, involving such tremendous ingenuity, such brain power, such insight, and profiting so much from the accumulated knowledge in the natural sciences that it is quite breathtaking. It just simply does take the breath away. And I have to say that it's remarkable also that there at CERN you have an Indian next to a Pakistani, you have an Israeli next to a Palestinian, you have an Iranian next to an American, all working away at something jointly, some objective inquiry, and there are fellows in this enterprise. And just 2 miles away, 3 miles away, in the center of Geneva, there is the Human Rights Council, where the representatives of their different countries are all at one another's throats constantly. That makes you want to take all those representatives at the UN and take them downstairs in the Large Hadron Collider. It actually makes you want to fire them around the ring of the Large Hadron Collider. But it makes you want to take them there to see what an objective inquiry is and how it brings people together. Science really does bring people together in a way that religion and politics never can. So that addresses that question, the sort of metaphysical question. Now the other question, the question that I described, the sort of secularism, humanism question. We've had a good deal of debate about secularism, and it's quite right, absolutely right, that the major issue today is trying to diminish the presence of religion in the public square, on policy decisions, and in education. This is a priority. And yet the tendencies at the moment are in the opposite direction. In my own country, in the UK, the government in the last 10, 15 years has been giving more and more tax money to faith-based schooling. This they've done, on the basis of the wonderful experiment in faith-based schooling, which is called Northern Ireland. And they seem to have learned absolutely nothing from that. And in many different ways, including medical research and medical services, the negative influence of the over-amplified religious voice in the public square is a serious problem, and it does have to be diminished. But what I'd like to focus on now, just in concluding, is what I called contemporary humanism, or secular humanism as we understand it today. And I want to say about it that humanism as we understand it today, which is a family of views about ethics, really, and also about politics, in the sense that Aristotle uses that term, that is, thinking about the construction of a society which is very friendly to, very encouraging to, the development of good and flourishing individual lives, at the heart of which would be good relationships with people you care about and with your fellows in society, and which gives to individuals a margin, a space, in which they can develop themselves according to their gifts for living good lives. It's a tremendously important point, this one, well recognized in the Enlightenment, for example, so central to the Enlightenment argument, that society should be in principle pluralistic, because all of us have very different needs and interests and desires, very different talents. There are lots and lots of different things that are valuable in the course of human life, lots of important things that can be made and pursued and realized in the course of human life. And it's wrong to expect people to conform with one another and with some one ideal imposed on them top down. And this, of course, is the model of the great religions. There's one great truth. Everybody has to sign up for it. Everybody's got to obey on pain of punishment. And this monolithic structure of the great religions is precisely the monolithic structure of Stalinism or Nazism. There's one great truth and everybody's got to obey on pain of punishment. It's the same thing. It's no surprise to me that Joseph Stalin was bred up in a seminary and that Adolf Hitler was a Catholic. I mean, they must have learned something from those experiences and applied them. And you get this canard that, the totalitarianisms of the 20th century were products of the Enlightenment. No, they are wonderful examples of the counter-Enlightenment, just as the negative aspects of Romanticism, which privileges the tribe, the blood of the people, your own ethnicity, or the importance of emotion and sentiment over reason, and so on, was a cause of problems in the 19th and 20th century, especially in the form of nationalism. One has to recognize them as counter-Enlightenment movements. But the idea of pluralism, the idea of a broad domain in which lots of different interests can flourish, consistently always, of course, with the good of all in that domain. And John Stuart Mill stated in his great essay on liberty that the one central rule here in thinking about the plurality of interests and desires is that the pursuit of them by us should never harm other people in their pursuit of what they want to do and what they see as their good. And under the government of this principle, the harm principle, Mill wanted to see as wide a range of human experiments as possible. And this indeed is a directly Enlightenment insight into the possibility of human flourishing once individuals have been liberated from the prison houses of orthodoxy, the hegemony over the mind of religious teachings, and the possession of the human individual by an absolute monarch. And so it's a powerful Enlightenment ideal, but it's one which has an antecedent. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of two former Enlightenments. The earlier one was in the Renaissance period. When you look at medieval conceptions of what the life of human beings is, when you look at what's called the Contemptus Mundi literature, the literature about what an awful place the world is, full of disease and darkness, and life is short and difficult and bitter, and we are surrounded by demons who want to steal away our immortal souls. We've got to hang in there somehow, grit our teeth if we've got any, and get to heaven in the end. And everything was focused on, even the great buildings, the great Gothic cathedrals represent in stone this idea of rocketing away from earth and getting up into the heavens, away from this awful dispensation here on the surface. But the Renaissance is full of poetry about love and paintings about picnics in the countryside and beautiful music, a refocusing, in other words, on human life in this world now. And it's called the Renaissance. It was called the Renaissance by some of the leaders of the Renaissance, like Petrarch himself, who coined the term the Middle Ages, to denote a rediscovery of something which was the classical and Hellenic attitude to life, which was about the good that is to be found and enjoyed here in this world, in this life now. That was the rediscovery. And that tips us off to the fact that the first great Enlightenment, and the source of our humanistic principles, was classical antiquity, was the world of Athens, the Athens of Pericles, the Hellenic world that followed. That was an attempt. If you look at the great ethical schools of classical antiquity, you see that was an attempt to provide people with a way of thinking and acting in this world, in this lifetime, with no reference to divinities, no divine command from outside, no great beliefs about the afterlife. And in fact, the Greeks universally thought that the afterlife was a very dismal place. You went underground, and unless you were a tremendous hero, you just flitted about rather dismally in the shadows of the asphodel meadows, where the souls of the departed squeak and twitter like bats, as Shakespeare tells us. And they forget everything, once they've crossed the river Lethe, they forget everything. And it's a very miserable place. So they weren't interested in the afterlife. They were much more interested in not getting there. And they were very keen to leave a reputation behind them in the world of the living. This is why Pindar wrote odes to the great athletes. This is why Achilles and other great heroes wanted to leave a mark on the minds of people of the living in this world now. And it's the focus on this world which the Renaissance rediscovered and which the Enlightenment rediscovered. And what they have in common is this thought that it is the human individual, it is the human experience, it is our best understanding of the human condition and of human nature on which we should premise our thinking about the good life and the good society, about the sorts of things that are valuable and worth pursuing. And that is why we use the word humanism. I mean, it's a bit sort of obliquely connected with the idea in the Renaissance period of the humanities, the study of the humane letters that have been rediscovered and reappreciated at that time. But of course there is a connection, namely that those humane letters that were being studied were about human beings, not about the afterlife, not about angels and archangels, not about what human beings have to do to get into heaven, but how one should live and what the dignity of the human individual is in this life. Hence, titles of works like Pico della Mirandola, the essay on the oration on the dignity of man. Well, what's important about this for us now is that the point is very often made that it is the religions that offer emotional satisfaction or spirituality or an experience of the transcendent. And you go into a great cathedral and the organ is playing and there's incense, and you can be captured by psychologically by this atmosphere and feel that you've stepped to a place apart from the ordinary demands of life. Sunday became just such a place. If you went to church, it was a place apart from the rigors and exigencies of daily life, and that this was a refreshment to the soul. And that's why very often you see outside churches the phrase from the Bible, "Come unto me, all ye who are burdened, heavy laden, and I will refresh you." This idea of the refreshment offered by the spiritual. And this is a fantastic achievement on the part of the religions, to have absorbed and monopolized the idea of the spiritual, the idea of refreshment. I mean the word spiritual in an entirely secular way, to do with our complicated emotions and our emotional responses and our emotional needs, and the way that they can sometimes connect with our intellects, which is why sometimes you can enjoy, if you're a mathematician, the beauty of a proof, or why you can look at a painting and marvel at the technical skill as well as the story told by it, or as well as the striking character of the painting aesthetically, visually. So this complex of emotional and intellectual responses to things, and our sense of connection with this world of ours, which in so many ways is an extraordinarily beautiful one, and the tenderest aspects of our relationships to other people. These are things which are part of human experience and part of the human condition. They belong to us, and therefore humanism recognizes them and embodies them in its thinking about the good, about ethics. It doesn't belong solely to religion. In fact, religion has hijacked these things. It's so hijacked them that people now don't think that a walk in the country, or listening to music, or being with friends, or just twiddling your toes and looking at the sky, aren't forms of refreshment for the spirit, in the secular sense, of human beings. But so they are. Why should it just belong to religion, to be able to speak to those aspects of ourselves? Humanism is perfectly capable of alerting people to the fact that there are all sorts of different ways in which we can be nourished intellectually and emotionally as human beings without having to appeal to anything transcendent or divine. Now, the churches, until very recently, have taken a monopoly of birth, marriage, and death. And these great moments of transition, these rites of passage in our lives, which seem to demand of us that we do something special to mark them. And as you know, organized humanist societies with a capital H now do things like humanist marriages and humanist funerals. But in the general public, there is this, kind of anxiety about wicker caskets and open-toed sandals and beards and things, and they're just quite the same thing. It doesn't have the bells and smells of a church, which seems to be more appropriate when you've lost somebody very dear to you. And so the humanist thing seems to be a slightly poor substitute for it in the minds of some people. In fact, it isn't at all, and some of these ceremonies can be very uplifting. But it is true that people need ceremonies, and they do need rites of passage. And I'm minded of some examples given in literature of the choices that people make themselves to mark something very important, like a birth, welcoming a child into the family, into the community, or people deciding to live together, pooling their resources and building a life together, raising children together, or what we do when somebody we care about dies. There are lots of different imaginative things that we do, which we've been stopped from thinking about and making up, because there is this convention, there is this tradition of baptism and the marriage ceremony in church and the church funeral. You don't need a humanist ceremony, you just need you. You just need you in some imagination. You just need you in the recovery of the sense that we are each of us perfectly capable of finding ways of marking these great moments of transition in lives, and indeed of refreshing ourselves every day or every week, as it might be, in more satisfying and more honest, and this I think is the fundamental point, much more honest ways than are offered by the religions when they address these needs in our society. Sometimes people say, how can you attack religion when you consider the comfort it gives to somebody old and alone and afraid? And I say, how much better it would be if we, the neighbors of such a person, could give that person love. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Let's see how this goes. All right, we have about 5-7 minutes here for a couple questions. So do we have some questions lined up here?
We have one gentleman in green down here who has a question.
Okay.
That's actually... Come here.
Thank you, Professor, for beautiful speech. Thank you so much. And thank you for lovely people here. I want to explain for you, my name is Leon. Before Professor University in the Iran, when before I gave lecture about Darwin or about this stuff, I have been in jail many years and tortured me and hang my sister opposite my eyes and shoot my brother, two brothers opposite my eyes. I learned for my life, never not give up. And I come here today, I'm so happy I see Professor, and I want to see Mr. Richard Dock, and also I have book for signature. I have different question from you. Why we are here? We are here not for only a struggle. We are here not for only explain. We are here for change. I have question from you. I give beautiful friend in the paper, but I not believe bureaucracy. My question, philosopher, what do you think, Professor, about nature mind and nature reality? How can you see these people? I see these people. I see you in the screen. I see you in the picture. I see you. What different nature mind and what different nature reality? This is one question. Second question, why nature mankind always selfishness, always love kill each other? Why like that? Why nature mankind like that, opposite each other? One hand you love, one hand you kill. One you selfishness, one other side you interest yourself. Two questions. What is nature name, nature mankind? Why selfishness? Other question, what is nature reality and mankind? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that question. Well, I'll answer the second of the two questions, or try to answer the second of the two questions you asked there, and then I'll try to answer this one, which you've written down. The second of the two questions you asked was, how is it that human beings can be such an alloy, that we can be full of kindness and tenderness to other people, but also have this capacity for cruelty and for unkindness, and for treating the other as something less than ourselves. And alas, this is a fact about us. Obviously, history thrills horribly with examples of the inhumanity of human beings to one another, no question about it. And when we talk about humanism, and we talk about trying to base our ethics on our best understanding of human nature, that understanding has to include this fact about us. It's a very troubling fact, because if you think about Nazism in Germany in the 30s and 40s, and what very many ordinary Germans did to their fellow human beings, and you ask yourself, what does this mean? Does it mean that there is a streak of malice or evil in that people? No, is the answer. Does that mean that all of us are capable of this? And alas, yes, is the answer. Circumstances can make us behave in ways that are, deeply, deeply wrong. So the task that we face is in the education of sensibilities, really. We do this to ourselves in our schooling, of course, but much, much more richly we do it through our literature, through our arts, through our reflection, through our encounter with one another, of trying to promote mutual understanding and tolerance. And I often point out that we all think we're very tolerant. It's because we don't really mind. But when we do mind, then that's when the work of tolerance begins, if we recognize the right of other people to think and act differently from ourselves, subject, of course, to the harm principle. But it's a work to be done. It's a job of work. trying to diminish the harm that we're all capable of doing and enhancing the good. And the good news is that although our newspapers are full of terrible news about atrocities and disasters and conflicts and punishments and hangings and the rest, every day in every human community all around the world, there are tens of thousands of acts of kindness. And I can't help feeling that on the whole, the very evidence of human societies and human cities and the rest is evidence far more of cooperation than of conflict, far more of the bonds that human beings feel for one another than of oppositions. There's one little example that one can use in this connection. If you were walking down a street behind somebody and that person was underneath a teetering pile of bricks just about to fall on their head, what would you do? You wouldn't stand back and say, "This is going to be interesting," or get your camera out in the hope of getting a nice shot of them. You would spontaneously and instinctively shout out, call out to them, look out. And it wouldn't matter who that person was, what religion they were, what gender, what anything, but you would call out instinctively to a fellow human being in such a situation, and that is a very positive and hopeful sign about ourselves. And that's the one, of course, that we have to work to enhance. Now the second... Sorry. Shall I just finish with the second? The second question that our friend from Iran asked, and I read it out to you, he said, "We know religion and politics are married. This is an international problem. In the Middle East, the system is dogmatic and hypocritical in the name of God. How can we solve this?" It might be that the question says, is dogmatic and hypocritical in the name of God, how can we solve this? I'm not sure where the emphasis should lie. But I think it ought to be the first one. Well, this adverts to a theme which has recurred and recurred all throughout our discussion so far this weekend, and it really is very central, because the primary task is to reduce the footprint of religions in our public square. I've said elsewhere, and I really hold to this view, that in a liberal society, even though, in an open, liberal, pluralistic society, even though the great paradox of such societies is that we find ourselves tolerating the intolerant, and they rise up in our midst and then they threaten our tolerance and our openness. One of the most tragic modern examples is the Netherlands. The Dutch people are the warmest-hearted, most open-armed, most welcoming people in the world, rational, tolerant, and they welcomed in lots of immigrants, and one result has been a serious threat to the stability of their society. As a result, it's a tragic thing, and it is a difficulty. But what we have to do is to say, of course, people are entitled to believe what they like. If you believe that there are fairies at the bottom of your garden, and just so long as it doesn't bother anybody else, believe what you like. And moreover, all groups and all individuals, of course, are entitled to be part of the conversation and to have their say. We tend to listen to them more when they have some competence. It's not clear that that's always the case, even with the churches in our society, but when it's something on which they have an interest or a claim, let's hear them. But the trouble, of course, is that the religions have a vastly overinflated presence in our society for historical and other reasons, and that is now the real target. We've got to diminish the size of the religious presence. We've got to turn their volume down a little bit, and we've got to persuade them to recognize at last that they are self-selected interest groups on a par with all others in society, and they're not entitled any more than any of the others are to our tax money or to an amplifier or to a special place in society.
One more question, the middle up there.
This might take a little while, but not too long. I'll try and keep it brief. One of the things that I wanted to state is that I have a question and a possible idea, and that idea I'm happy to have criticised. Actually, I want as much criticism as I can. But the idea and the thing that bothers me, and I have sent emails to various different types of groups, and I was looking for an answer, and I suppose that might not be the best way to approach things. Okay, yep, I'm going to get there. Okay, one, there's a group in the medical system at the moment which are known in Greek as healers of the spirit, And I know you define spirit as something that, you know, walk in the park and things like that, but they can't be defined. So how can you fix something you can't define? And the particular people I'm talking about is psychiatrists. Actually, that's what it means in Greek, healer of the spirit. Now, if I'm correct, and I am willing for a lot of discussion on this about being healers of the spirit, then shouldn't there be a scientific alternative? An alternative that accepts criticism, complete criticism of its ideas, and comes up with an empirical model. I'm a secular humanist, so I don't believe in the supernatural, and thus I don't believe in psychiatry.
So essentially,
Well,
is there...
I've got some good news for you, which is that psychiatry doesn't any longer mean healing the spirit.
Oh, well, that's what it means in Greek.
And that's the answer, I'm afraid.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.